Let me tell you what it feels like to have your entire life erased in 6 words. We're letting you go, effective immediately. Imagine dedicating 8 years of your life to a company, surviving 3 tours in Afghanistan, earning a Purple Heart, and building a network of military connections that brought in millions in defense contracts. Now imagine watching your white boss smile as he tells you that you're just not a cultural fit. First Meridian Defense Solutions glass headquarters holds its breath. A black man in a perfectly pressed suit stands motionless, his prosthetic hand gripping his service record. Behind the mahogany desk, CEO Richard Whitman leans back in his ergonomic chair, that practiced corporate smile never wavering. 12 employees watch in shocked silence. Phones slide discreetly from pockets. A new hire covers her mouth in horror. This is Major Marcus Johnson. He controls $1.8 billion in military procurement relationships. In exactly 24 minutes, he will speak 7 words that will obliterate this man's company. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Whitman doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His weapon is corporate policy sharpened to a razor's edge. Of course. I completely understand your disappointment. His smile never falters. It's just that our leadership culture has very specific requirements. I'm sure you understand. The word, leadership, lands like a coded slur. Marcus's chest tightens. His grandfather served in a segregated unit during World War II. His father fought in Vietnam, returning to a country that still wouldn't serve him at certain lunch counters. He himself lost his right hand, clearing an IED to save his unit. He's earned his place here with blood, sweat, and unwavering loyalty. What requirements specifically? Marcus asks, his voice steady as titanium. Well, our executive positions require a certain executive presence, communication style, leadership approach, boardroom dynamics, that sort of thing. His eyes rake over Marcus dismissively. Your military background has been valuable, but we're moving in a more corporate direction. What opportunities are you considering next? The question drips with dismissal. Behind him, a senior engineer's breath catches. The HR director shifts uncomfortably in her chair. Phones emerge from pockets like silent witnesses, recording every syllable of institutional discrimination. VP of Finance Karen Miller leans forward, 5 years of practiced prejudice flowing through her thinly veiled explanations. I'm sorry, but our quarterly projections are requiring certain adjustments to our staffing structure. Your position has been identified as redundant. It's a beautiful lie. The project manager who just got promoted last week, 38% less qualified. The junior executive who leapfrogged 3 levels, 0 military experience. But for Marcus, his position has suddenly become, quote, redundant. Miller's fingers dance across her tablet in elaborate theater, each swipe a small act of cruelty, disguised as corporate procedure. Marcus watches the performance with the detached interest of someone who's survived actual combat. As Miller performs her digital justification, Marcus places his phone face down on the polished desk. Black case, gold military insignia catching the fluorescent light for exactly 3 seconds. United States Department of Defense. Whitman doesn't notice. He's too intoxicated by his own perceived power to see the sword hanging over his head. You know what might work better? Whitman's voice takes on that special tone reserved for speaking to children and those he deems intellectually inferior. We have a security consultant position in our facility management division. It's really excellent for people with your background. People with your background. The phrase detonates in the corporate silence like an IED. A woman behind Marcus whispers, Jesus Christ. A young intern's fingers fly across his phone. Hashtag fired while black begins its viral journey, though none of them know they're making history. I'm perfectly comfortable with my current position, Marcus responds, his voice carrying undertones of something Whitman can't quite identify. Amusement. Anticipation. Well, that's just it. Whitman continues, his confidence swelling. Comfort isn't really the issue. This is about strategic realignment, market positioning, shareholder value. As if Marcus's skin color represents a quantifiable threat to their quarterly earnings. Marcus shifts his portfolio slightly. For exactly 4 seconds, a corner of embossed card emerges from his folder. Department of Defense Security Clearance. Top Secret/SCI. Required for $1. $2 billion in pending defense contracts. Whitman misses it entirely. He's too busy savoring his moment of corporate dominance. Whitman rises to his full height now, using every inch to project authority. I'm afraid HR will need to escort you to clear out your desk. We have strict protocols for departing employees, especially those with access to sensitive information. Employees. Not colleagues, not veterans, employees. Security Director Thomas Reed appears within 45 seconds, but something's different about his approach. His eyes find Marcus's briefly, and there's recognition there. Not of his face, but of the situation. He's witnessed this particular brand of institutional prejudice before. Mr. Johnson, Reed says carefully, positioning himself slightly between Marcus and Whitman. Company protocol requires I accompany you while you gather your personal items. His tone carries an undertone of apology that Whitman completely misses. Reed has 2 sons in the military. He knows exactly what's happening here. The executive floor has transformed into a theater of injustice. 14 employees, all unwilling witnesses to a masterclass in systemic racism, delivered in real time. Their phones capture every word, every sneer, every calculated humiliation. What they're recording will become the most expensive termination in defense contracting history. You know what, Mr. Whitman? Marcus's voice cuts through the tension like titanium wrapped around steel. You're absolutely right. This is about strategic alignment, about knowing exactly who you're dealing with. Whitman practically glows with vindication. Finally, I'm glad we can resolve this professionally. Some people just need to understand how things work in the real world. The real world. The irony is thick enough to stop bullets. Marcus's hand moves to his phone with deliberate precision. His thumb scrolls through contacts until it finds the name that will reshape Whitman's understanding of power structures forever. At the very top of his contact list, marked with a star for priority access, General James Harrington, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Pentagon. General James Harrington. Karen Miller. The military connection that's about to turn this from professional humiliation into corporate devastation. Mr. Whitman, Marcus says, his voice carrying the preternatural calm that precedes airstrikes. I think it's time we clarified exactly who requires strategic realignment here. He presses call. The name illuminates his screen in bold letters. General James Harrington, JCS. Karen Miller's face drains of all color. Her fingers freeze above her tablet. That name, that number. How does this man have direct access to the Joint Chiefs? The phone rings once, twice. Then a voice answers that will change everything. Hello, James. It's Marcus Johnson. The voice that answers crackles through the speaker, warm and immediate. Marcus, how's the Meridian partnership performing this quarter? The Pentagon's eager for those new drone guidance systems. The words detonate through the executive floor like flashbangs. Whitman's smirk dies on his lips. Karen Miller's tablet falls silent. The senior engineer drops his coffee mug. I'm standing in First Meridian's headquarters right now, Marcus says, his voice steel over silk. Executive floor having a fascinating discussion about strategic realignment. Strategic realignment? Harrington's voice sharpens. What the hell is happening over there? Whitman's face cycles through confusion, recognition, and absolute terror. His mouth works soundlessly like a fish drowning in corporate quicksand. Your CEO, Richard, has been very educational about leadership requirements. Marcus continues, never breaking eye contact with Whitman. Haven't you, Richard? The casual use of his first name hits Whitman like a physical blow. How does he know the general's name? How does he have the Joint Chief's personal number? How is James Harrington talking to him like they're battle brothers? Put Whitman on now. The general's voice could freeze hellfire. Whitman reaches for the phone with trembling hands. General Harrington. Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. Richard Whitman, CEO since 2019. Currently, under consideration for $1. $8 billion in defense contracts. That you? The specificity is surgical. Whitman nods frantically, forgetting Harrington can't see him. Sir, if I could just explain. Hand the phone back to Major Johnson immediately, Major Johnson. The military title hangs in the air like a court-martial. Marcus accepts the phone with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to military deference. James, I think your defense contractor might be confused about our strategic relationship. Confused? Quote. Harrington's voice rises dangerously. Marcus Johnson represents our direct liaison for the new autonomous weapons platforms. Your company is being considered for $8 billion in contracts because of his recommendation. You're on the Pentagon's priority vendor list because of his service record. $8 billion. The number explodes through the executive floor like a bunker buster. Whitman staggers backward, his knees actually buckling. Karen Miller's face drains of all color, leaving her looking like a corporate cadaver. The crowd of witnesses has transformed from shocked bystanders to hungry spectators at the greatest corporate reversal in defense contracting history. Well, Marcus continues conversationally, Richard suggested I might be more comfortable in a security consultant position. Apparently, I don't meet executive leadership standards. The silence through the speaker is deafening. When Harrington's voice returns, it carries the kind of rage that ends careers and destroys companies. Are you fucking serious? Oh, and your HR department believes my position is redundant, at least according to Ms. Miller here. Karen Miller makes a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. Karen Miller. The general's voice sharpens to a razor point. Your VP of Finance, Karen Miller? The one whose brother works at the Pentagon Procurement Office? The nepotism connection explodes into the open like an infected wound bursting. Karen's legs give out entirely. She grabs the desk for support, her career imploding in real time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Chief Operating Officer Sarah Davis chooses this catastrophic moment to arrive, radiating corporate authority. She surveys this scene with the confidence of someone who believes she's in control. Complete miscalculation. What's the situation here? Davis demands. Marcus looks up from his phone. Are you the COO? Sarah Davis, Chief Operating Officer for First Meridian Defense. And you are? Through the speaker, Harrington's voice cuts like a combat knife. Ms. Davis, this is General James Harrington, Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're speaking to Major Marcus Johnson, Purple Heart recipient, and our principal liaison for the Autonomous Weapons Initiative. Your CEO has just delivered a masterclass in institutional racism to our most valued military partner. Davis's corporate confidence evaporates like water in a desert. Major Johnson controls access to $8 billion in defense contracts. Harrington continues relentlessly. He sits on our technology advisory board. He has direct access to 3 cabinet secretaries. And your company has spent 20 minutes treating him like a security threat. Security Director Thomas Reed quietly steps backward, his instincts vindicated. This man doesn't need protection from the company. The company needs protection from him. Davis's damage control training kicks in. Major Johnson, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Marcus's voice develops a new edge sharp enough to cut through armor plating. Richard told me I need to understand how corporate leadership works. Karen implied I don't qualify for executive positions. You all seemed quite certain about who belongs here. The phones recording this massacre have multiplied exponentially. 14 witnesses have become 20, then 30. Hashtag fired while black transmitting in real time. Davis scrambles desperately. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Privately? Marcus's laugh could shatter reinforced glass. Like how Richard privately questioned my leadership abilities. How Karen privately suggested the security position. Harrington's voice crackles through again. I'm implementing immediate review of all pending contracts, full investigation into hiring practices, complete vendor qualification review. But Marcus isn't finished. Not remotely. James, before you do anything hasty, we should examine whether this represents an isolated incident or systematic discrimination. The phrase systematic discrimination detonates like white phosphorus. Davis's face goes ashen. Whitman looks genuinely nauseous. Karen Miller starts crying actual tears. What kind of systematic issues? Harrington asks, though his tone suggests he knows the answer will ruin Defense Department relationships for years. I've been analyzing some fascinating statistical patterns in your hiring and promotion metrics, Marcus says with clinical precision. Advancement rates for minority employees, termination patterns for veterans, compensation discrepancies for identical qualifications. The data tells quite a story. The implication lands like a direct hit. This isn't about today. This isn't about Whitman or Miller or Davis. This is about provable, documented, legally actionable discrimination patterns. Whitman finds his voice, but it emerges as a broken whisper. Major Johnson, I had absolutely no idea. No idea about what, Richard? Marcus's surgical use of his first name draws blood. My military clearance, or that actions have consequences. The question hangs unanswered, because honesty would mean professional suicide. Harrington's voice cuts through the devastation. I'm sending a Pentagon team there personally. Don't move. Don't do anything. We're addressing this immediately. Marcus ends the call and surveys the wreckage he's created, with nothing more than a 10-digit phone number. Whitman trembles like a leaf in a hurricane. Karen Miller sobs quietly into her hands. Davis stares into the middle distance, calculating her remaining career prospects. The crowd watches in fascination as institutional power dynamics collapse in real time. But as Marcus places his phone back on the polished desk, one truth becomes crystalline clear. This is only the beginning. The silence after Harrington's call stretches like a tripwire, ready to detonate. Whitman stands frozen, his world tilting on its axis. Karen Miller's tears drip onto her tablet. Davis stares into the void where her career used to be. Then Marcus does something unexpected. He laughs. Not bitter, not angry. Pure, genuine amusement that somehow makes everything infinitely worse. You know what's funny, Richard? His voice carries the dangerous calm of someone holding all the cards. Exactly 47 minutes ago, I was sitting in a conference room at the Pentagon. Whitman blinks in confusion. 47 minutes ago, he was what? Pentagon Strategic Planning Division, secure briefing room with the satellite uplink to CENTCOM. Know whose meeting that was? The question hangs like a court-martial verdict. That's General Harrington's weekly defense technology briefing. Your ultimate client. We were discussing the $1, $8 billion autonomous systems contract. She pauses, savoring the moment. When I told him I wanted to conduct a little experiment. Experiment. The word detonates through Whitman's consciousness like shrapnel. You see, James has been receiving some disturbing reports about contractor discrimination in certain companies. Statistical anomalies. Pattern inconsistencies. Marcus's voice takes on the clinical tone of a military analyst describing battlefield results. So we decided to test the hypothesis. Whitman's mouth goes dry. Test what hypothesis? Whether systematic discrimination would occur when a qualified black veteran executive was suddenly treated as expendable. The revelation hits like a Moab strike. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was a calculated experiment, and Whitman just failed it spectacularly. The entire interaction has been monitored, Marcus continues conversationally. Audio surveillance from my phone. Video feed from those security cameras you're so fond of. Real-time observation from Pentagon oversight personnel. He glances upward almost casually. Hi, Thomas? Security Director Reed's face goes ashen. He knows exactly who Marcus is talking to. Pentagon oversight. They've been watching everything. But here's the really interesting part, Marcus says, his voice developing that edge that makes smart people run for cover. James and I made a small wager about how long it would take for discriminatory behavior to manifest. A wager. He bet money on being discriminated against. I said within 10 minutes. James thought your training was better than that. He gave you 30 minutes. His smile could cut through tank armor. You lasted exactly 6 minutes and 23 seconds before suggesting I belong in security rather than leadership. Whitman staggers backward like he's been shot. Major Johnson, please what? Please pretend this didn't happen? Please ignore the systematic racism you just demonstrated on camera? His voice sharpens to a scalpel's edge. Please forget that you've provided irrefutable evidence of federal contract violations? Federal contract violations. The words hit Whitman like artillery fire. Because here's what you need to understand, Marcus continues relentlessly. This wasn't just employment discrimination. This was a federal compliance test, and you just failed it in the most spectacular way possible. He reaches into his portfolio again, But this time he pulls out something that makes Whitman's blood freeze. A badge. Federal credentials. Department of Defense seal. Major Marcus Johnson. He reads from his identification. Special Consultant, Defense Contract Management Agency, Compliance Division. The badge hits the polished desk with the finality of a military tribunal verdict. Whitman's legs give out. He grabs the desk for support, his face cycling through shock, terror, and complete understanding of how thoroughly he's been destroyed. The Department of Defense has been investigating systematic discrimination in defense contracting for 16 months, Marcus explains with clinical detachment. We've documented patterns across 38 contractors in 14 states. He pauses, letting the scope sink in. But we needed irrefutable evidence of discriminatory intent. Video proof of institutional bias. Witnesses to systematic exclusion. His smile returns, predatory and satisfied. Congratulations, Richard. You just provided everything we needed. Karen Miller's sobbing intensifies to actual wailing. Davis looks like she might vomit. Reed quietly steps further away from the disaster zone. The beautiful thing about federal investigations, Marcus continues, is the scope of prosecution. Individual charges for each act of discrimination. Institutional charges for systematic bias. Corporate charges for policy violations. He counts on his fingers like a drill sergeant counting push-ups. Equal employment opportunity violations. Title VII infractions. Federal contractor compliance failures. Contract fraud. Misrepresentation to government agencies. Each charge lands like a physical blow. Contract suspension. Financial penalties. Criminal prosecution. Federal blacklisting. Whitman finally finds his voice, but it emerges as a broken whisper. How long have you been watching us? 17 months of surveillance. 11 months of documentation. 5 months of legal preparation. Marcus's voice carries the satisfaction of a strategic victory announced at the end of a successful mission. Today was just the final piece of evidence. He pulls out his phone again, but this time he shows them the screen. Not a contact list. Not a phone number. A live video feed. This entire interaction has been broadcast in real time to the Department of Defense Compliance Task Force. Quote, he explains casually. 8 federal attorneys, 6 equal opportunity investigators, and 1 very angry Secretary of Defense have been watching your performance. The camera on his phone has been recording everything, broadcasting everything, transmitting their destruction to federal prosecutors in real time. They are particularly interested in your suggestion about me having the right background for security rather than leadership, Marcus observes. That kind of coded racial redlining hasn't been documented this clearly since the 1990s. Whitman stares at the phone in horror. 8 federal attorneys, 6 investigators, all watching him destroy his life, 1 racist comment at a time. But here's my absolute favorite part, Marcus says, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. The statistical analysis we've been conducting. He shows them another screen. Graphs. Charts. Data visualization that would make a Pentagon analyst weep. Your company has the highest discrimination rates in the entire defense sector. 68% lower promotion rates for minority employees. 47% faster termination patterns for identical performance metrics. 92% of cultural fit dismissals target black professionals. Each statistic is a nail in their collective coffin. You're not just racist, Richard. You're a statistically, provably, federally documented racist. His voice develops an edge that could cut diamond. Your discrimination is so consistent it constitutes a mathematical pattern. He closes the phone with finality that sounds like a cell door slamming shut. So when you questioned my leadership abilities, you weren't just firing a black veteran. You were providing evidence in a federal case that will cancel your contracts and blacklist this company permanently. The executive floor has become a mausoleum. 30 witnesses stand in absolute silence, watching institutional racism collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. Whitman makes one final desperate attempt. Major Johnson, I was just following company policy. Policy? Marcus's laugh could shatter reinforced glass. You mean the discriminatory practices your corporate office distributed? The racial profiling guidelines disguised as cultural fit assessment? The systematic exclusion protocols masked as leadership requirements? He leans forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carries more menace than artillery fire. We have copies of everything, Richard. Every memo, every hiring guideline, every evaluation metric that institutionalized racism. His smile returns, cold as combat steel. Your defense just became evidence of conspiracy. The truth settles over Whitman like a burial shroud. He didn't just commit individual acts of discrimination. He followed institutional policies designed to discriminate, which makes it conspiracy, which makes it federal, which makes it over. The irony, Marcus concludes with military precision, is that treating me with basic human dignity would have saved your contracts, your company, and your career. He stands, gathering his materials with the efficiency of someone whose mission here is nearly finished. But racism made you stupid, Richard, and stupid made you criminally liable. He heads toward the door, then pauses. Oh, and Richard, the Pentagon compliance team should be here any minute. As if summoned by his words, black SUVs pull up outside the building. Game over. The Defense Department officials enter like a tactical unit. No Hollywood dramatics, no shouting, just quiet, terrifying efficiency that makes Whitman's legs buckle. Lead investigator Rebecca Martinez displays her credentials with the casual authority of someone who's terminated billion-dollar contracts before breakfast. Richard Whitman, we're initiating immediate review of all federal contracts with First Meridian Defense Solutions. The federal procurement regulations echo through corporate halls like a death knell. Whitman's hands shake as compliance officers begin collecting records. Karen Miller's wailing could wake the dead as she joins the federal parade of professional destruction. But as agents secure digital evidence, Marcus's phone buzzes. 4 words that change everything. Emergency board meeting now. The elevator to the top floor moves with agonizing slowness. 42 floors to ascend from institutional racism to corporate reckoning. And then the boardroom doors open to reveal First Meridian's complete power structure, assembled in crisis formation. Board Chairman William Bennett sits rigid at a conference table worth more than most combat veterans. Annual salaries. 11 board members, 5 executives, 3 panic-stricken lawyers. They look like defendants awaiting court-martial. Marcus. Bennett's voice carries the hollow tone of a man watching his empire crumble. Thank you for, William. He cuts him off with surgical precision, taking the power seat directly opposite him. I assume you enjoyed the show. Every Pentagon compliance officer in the building watched your executives commit textbook contract violations. Bennett confirms, his corporate composure cracking. Live streamed to our legal department, compliance officers, and crisis management team. Board member Catherine Chen leans forward, desperation bleeding through her professional veneer. Major Johnson, surely we can resolve this internally. Internally? Marcus's laugh could penetrate body armor. Catherine, your executives just provided federal prosecutors with enough evidence to terminate every defense contractor company holds. This isn't internal anymore. This is Pentagon oversight. Chief Legal Counsel David Ross slides a thick folder across polished mahogany. We've prepared a comprehensive settlement proposal. Settlement? Marcus's voice develops that dangerous edge. David, you seem confused about the nature of federal contract compliance. You don't settle discrimination violations. You lose procurement status. The lawyers exchange panicked glances. Corporate law school didn't prepare them for Department of Defense investigations. But then Bennett does something unexpected. He stands, walks to the window and laughs. Not nervous corporate laughter. Genuine amusement that makes everyone else deeply uncomfortable. You know what's funny, Marcus? He turns back to face the room. 8 months ago, I could have prevented all of this with a single meeting. The room freezes. What meeting? 8 months ago, the Defense Contract Management Agency contacted me directly. Bennett continues, his voice carrying bitter resignation. Informal inquiry about potential discrimination patterns. Off-the-record conversation about voluntary compliance programs. Marcus's eyes narrow slightly. This isn't in his federal briefing materials. They offered us a choice. Bennett explains to his horrified board. Voluntary self-audit with minimal federal oversight or formal investigation with full contract termination authority. Board member Robert Singh's face goes ashen. William, what did you tell them? Bennett's smile could cut glass. I told them First Meridian doesn't need federal babysitters. I told them our diversity efforts were exemplary. I told them discrimination claims were disgruntled employee vendettas. The confession hits the room like a bunker buster. He rejected federal cooperation. He dismissed discrimination concerns. He chose institutional arrogance over voluntary compliance. So when you orchestrated today's compliance test, Bennett continues, his gaze locked on Marcus, you weren't just documenting discrimination. You were documenting willful defiance of federal cooperation requests. The implication detonates through corporate consciousness like shrapnel. Willful defiance. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy to continue discriminatory behavior after federal warning. The beautiful irony. Bennett observes with the detached fascination of someone watching his own execution, is that voluntary compliance would have cost us maybe $12 million in training and oversight. Chief Financial Officer Maria Santiago calculates rapidly, her face reflecting growing horror. William, what's the cost of federal contract termination? Complete institutional collapse, Bennett answers flatly. Immediate suspension of $1, $8 billion in pending contracts. Debarment from federal procurement for up to 3 years. Shareholder lawsuits. Criminal liability for board members. The numbers hit like artillery fire. $12 million in voluntary compliance versus complete corporate annihilation. But here's the really interesting part. Bennett continues, his voice taking on that dangerous calm that precedes corporate massacres. Major Johnson didn't just document our discrimination today, he pulls out his own folder. Corporate documents, internal communications, email chains. He documented our systematic cover-up of federal cooperation requests, our deliberate dismissal of discrimination complaints, our conscious decision to continue discriminatory behavior after federal warning. Each revelation lands like a physical blow. They're not just guilty of discrimination, they're guilty of conspiracy, obstruction, and willful continuation of federal violations. Show them the really damaging evidence, Bennett says, sliding his folder toward Marcus. He opens it with clinical interest. Then his expression changes. For the first time today, he looks genuinely surprised. Internal emails. Executive communications. Board meeting minutes documenting their conscious decision to ignore federal warnings and continue discriminatory practices. You kept records, he observes with something approaching professional respect. You documented your own criminal conspiracy. Corporate governance, Bennett explains with bitter irony. We meticulously documented our decision to commit federal violations. The board members stare at their own written evidence of criminal enterprise. Email chains proving they knew about discrimination. Meeting minutes showing they chose to continue it. Financial records demonstrating institutional conspiracy. They built their own federal case against themselves. So here's our situation. Bennett continues with the calm of someone who's accepted complete defeat. Federal investigators now have evidence of systematic discrimination, willful defiance of cooperation requests, and documented criminal conspiracy. He returns to his seat, corporate authority completely evaporated. We're not negotiating settlement terms, Marcus. We're negotiating whether any of us remain in business. The truth settles over the room like poison gas. They're not corporate executives anymore. They're defendants in a federal case. Marcus closes the folder with finality that sounds like a prison door slamming shut. Here's what's going to happen. His voice carries the quiet authority of someone holding absolute power over institutional life and death. Complete dissolution of current management structure. Federal oversight of all operations. Criminal investigation of executive staff who participated in documented conspiracy. Each word lands like a military tribunal sentence. Establishment of a $150 million veteran employment fund. Complete restructuring under defense contract compliance. New management selected by Department of Defense qualification officers. $150 million. The board members calculate their personal financial destruction in real time. But here's your choice, Marcus continues with surgical precision. Voluntary cooperation with federal investigation in exchange for limited contract suspension or complete resistance leading to permanent debarment. He stands, gathering materials with the efficiency of someone whose mission here is nearly finished. You have until tomorrow morning to decide whether you're witnesses or co-conspirators. Bennett makes one final attempt at corporate dignity. And First Meridian's defense contracts? Quote, Marcus pauses at the door, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of absolute victory. That depends on whether your successors understand that systematic racism isn't just morally bankrupt. He opens the door, then delivers the final blow. It's literally bankrupt. The door closes behind him with military finality. In the boardroom, 12 of the most powerful people in defense contracting sit in absolute silence, contemplating federal debarment they built with their own documented arrogance. Corporate racism just received its federal death sentence, and they wrote the execution order themselves. 6 months later, Marcus walks through the same glass lobby where his humiliation became revolution. The security scanners gleam with identical precision. The biometric verification still separates worlds. But the soul of this place has been reborn. Behind the executive reception desk stands Thomas Reed, the same security director who positioned himself protectively between him and Whitman, now wears a VP of Security badge and the quiet dignity of someone who's seen justice delivered. Major Johnson. He greets him with genuine respect. Welcome back. The words carry weight beyond courtesy. 6 months ago, he wasn't welcome here. Today, he's the catalyst who transformed everything. Richard Whitman is facing federal charges. His corner office doesn't have glass walls or executive privileges. Janet Miller received 18 months probation plus community service teaching financial literacy to veteran families. Her brother lost his Pentagon position. Sarah Davis negotiated immunity in exchange for testifying against her corporate masters. But the real devastation happened 42 floors above. William Bennett. Federal compliance violation. $2. $5 million in personal fines. Lifetime ban from defense contracting. His corner office now belongs to someone who understands that dignity isn't a demographic luxury. 5 board members. Criminal convictions. Asset forfeiture. Personal liability totaling $32 million. Their country club memberships couldn't purchase federal pardons. The institutional surgery was precise and merciless. I have a meeting with the new CEO, Marcus tells Reed, the same words that triggered corporate earthquake 6 months ago. Of course. Dr. Ramirez is expecting you. 4 minutes, 15 seconds. Professional, efficient, respectful. Everything Whitman could have provided if racism hadn't made him stupid. But the real transformation lives in details invisible to casual observers. Miguel Rodriguez, a Hispanic veteran with a prosthetic leg, completed his executive interview moments before Marcus arrived. No coded language about cultural fit. No suggestions about more suitable positions. No discrimination theater designed to humiliate. His promotion was approved in 72 hours. Same qualifications, same responsibilities, same respect offered to every professional, regardless of surname or service history. The artificial intelligence monitoring system that now governs every hiring decision flagged 0 bias indicators. Mathematical proof that equity has become standard procedure. The $150 million Veteran Employment Fund has touched lives across the community. Maria Santos received $75,000 for the promotion denial that forced her family into financial hardship. David Kim's technology startup got $250,000 in funding after previous investment rejection that nearly destroyed his innovative combat medical system. But money alone couldn't heal the deeper wounds. Marcus watches Ashley Chen, the new diversity compliance officer, process applications with methodical fairness. Chen completed 180 hours of federal anti-bias training, not corporate seminars about legal protection, but intensive education about unconscious prejudice and systematic harm. The training worked because prejudice became unemployable. Every executive now understands that discrimination isn't just morally wrong or legally dangerous. It's professionally suicidal. Bias indicators trigger immediate federal investigation. Disparate treatment means instant termination. Systematic racism equals contract debarment. Accountability can be an excellent teacher when properly applied. The military response has been transformative. Word travels fast in veteran communities that remember institutional discrimination. Within 3 months, veteran applications increased 320%. Minority leadership candidates from previously excluded demographics rose 280%. Inclusion generated more innovation than decades of systematic exclusion. But the most profound change isn't captured in quarterly reports. Reed shows Marcus the Veteran Innovation Fund's latest projects. Combat medical technology developed by 3 amputee veterans. Drone guidance systems created by engineers who previously couldn't get past HR screening. Cybersecurity protocols designed by specialists previously deemed lacking executive presence. Pure technological advancement flowing directly from diversity enforcement. You know what's interesting? Reed observes as they review the numbers. Treating people with respect turned out to be the most innovative business model we've ever implemented. The irony is mathematically beautiful. Eliminating racism increased contract awards by $320 million. Basic human dignity generated more revenue than systematic discrimination. As Marcus prepares to leave, he notices a young black woman in a wheelchair approaching the executive elevator with visible nervousness. The same tentative approach Marcus once made, braced for institutional humiliation. But security's greeting is immediate and warm. "Good afternoon, Dr. Williams. The executive team is waiting for your presentation." The young woman relaxes visibly. No coded language, no demographic assumptions, no suggestion that she belongs elsewhere. Her security clearance takes 3 minutes, 42 seconds. Identical to every other contractor's experience regardless of mobility limitations or racial assumptions. The federal oversight will continue for 5 years, long enough to embed new corporate DNA, long enough to train executives who view discrimination as career suicide, long enough to prove that institutional racism can be surgically removed when consequences are swift and inescapable. 19 other defense contractors now face similar Department of Defense investigations. 11 companies implemented voluntary compliance programs rather than endure federal debarment. The ripple effect of one 20-minute humiliation has reshaped an entire industry, but the victory that matters most is personal. Walking past the security scanners where Whitman once orchestrated his degradation, Marcus reflects on the deeper transformation. This isn't just about contract compliance or federal oversight. This is about merit becoming non-negotiable. His phone buzzes with a text from Reed. "Thank you for refusing to accept unacceptable." 7 words that capture everything. He could have filed a complaint and moved on. He could have taken his expertise elsewhere and forgotten the incident. He could have accepted that some battles aren't worth fighting. Instead, he chose to prove that systematic racism becomes prosecutable when confronted by systematic consequences. The young scientist exits the elevator with a smile, her presentation completed with efficiency and respect. She'll tell her colleagues, her veteran community, her network, that First Meridian values talent regardless of demographic. Word will spread, trust will rebuild, innovation will flow to a company previously blinded by its own prejudice. All because one man refused to accept that dignity was negotiable. Justice, as it turns out, is the most profitable defense strategy of all. 2 years later, Marcus stands in the exact same spot where Whitman once humiliated him. Same glass lobby, same security station. But today, he's not here for a meeting. Today, he's here for closure. Thomas Reed, now Executive Vice President, greets him with the warm smile of someone whose life was forever changed by witnessing justice delivered. "Major Johnson, welcome home." Home. The word carries weight he never expected. This place that once symbolized institutional racism has become a monument to transformation. "I brought something for you," Marcus says, placing a bronze plaque on the reception desk. Reed reads aloud. "On this spot, April 15, 2023. Systematic racism met systematic accountability. Dedicated to everyone who refuses to accept that excellence is negotiable." His eyes water slightly. This security director turned executive understands the power of symbols, the importance of remembering what changed and why. But the real memorial isn't bronze. It's breathing. Ashley Chen approaches from her compliance station, now 6 months pregnant with her first child. "Major Johnson, I wanted to thank you personally. My daughter will grow up in a world where what happened to you can't happen to her." The words hit deeper than any congressional testimony or corporate settlement. This isn't about policy reform or federal oversight. This is about a child who will inherit opportunity as her birthright, not her battle. Behind Ashley, a line of employees reflects the company transformation. Miguel Rodriguez, the Hispanic veteran whose promotion was approved without coded discrimination. Dr. Patterson, the elderly black scientist whose innovations received the same respect as any other contractor. David Kim, whose combat medical technology now saves lives on battlefields worldwide. Lives changed, careers secured, excellence delivered. Whitman's empty office serves as a museum of institutional arrogance. His nameplate sits in a display case accompanied by federal court documents proving that racism has consequences. Visitors often pause here, studying the evidence that systematic discrimination carries personal liability. Educational tourism from the ruins of racial hatred. Janet Miller volunteers at the Veterans Center down the street, teaching financial management to military families previously excluded from defense industry opportunities. Her nephew, a recent West Point graduate, got his first technology contract from the same company where she once practiced discrimination. Redemption through service. Transformation through consequence. The numbers tell their own story. 380% increase in minority executive hiring nationwide. 340% rise in veteran-owned business contracting. $3 billion in previously denied innovation now flowing to contractors who earned it. But statistics pale beside human moments. A young black woman in uniform approaches the executive elevator with confident strides. No hesitation in her movement. She belongs here because excellence is universal, not demographic. Her security clearance takes 3 minutes, identical to every other officer's experience. No verification theater, no coded language, no suggestion that she'd be more comfortable elsewhere. Standard respect delivered systematically. Marcus watches this routine interaction with quiet satisfaction. The revolution succeeded not because it was dramatic, but because it made discrimination professionally impossible and personally expensive. Accountability properly applied becomes an excellent teacher. Reed walks him to the exit, past the security scanners that once witnessed his humiliation and now stand guard over transformed justice. "You know what I learned from all this?" he says quietly. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept the unacceptable." Marcus pauses at the threshold, looking back at the institution he helped reshape through sheer refusal to be diminished. "The beautiful thing about dignity," he responds, "is that it's contagious. Once one person demands it, everyone else remembers they deserve it too." He steps into afternoon sunlight, leaving behind a monument to systematic change and systematic justice. Your turn. Have you ever been somewhere you belonged but were treated like you were trespassing? Drop your story in the comments. Sometimes sharing breaks the silence that enables injustice. If this story made you feel something, share it. Real change happens when individual courage meets collective action. Subscribe for more stories, proving that one person's refusal to accept the unacceptable can reshape entire systems. Because dignity isn't negotiable and justice properly delivered is contagious. Marcus never intended to become the face of systemic change. 3 years after First Meridian's transformation, he finds himself standing before a congressional hearing on defense industry discrimination practices. Behind him sit 47 military veterans representing every branch of service, every ethnicity, every gender identity. Their collective presence creates a living wall of accountability that makes several committee members visibly uncomfortable. Major Johnson, Representative Eleanor Santos begins. "Could you explain how you first identified the pattern of discrimination at First Meridian Defense Solutions?" Marcus leans toward the microphone, his prosthetic hand gleaming under harsh committee lighting. The same titanium appendage that once marked him for discrimination now symbolizes his unbreakable resolve. "It wasn't one moment, Representative Santos. It was 1,000 small cuts over 8 years." His voice carries the measured precision of someone who understands that his words will reshape national policy. The executive who expressed surprise that a guy like me had Pentagon clearance. The promotion that went to someone with half my qualifications because they presented better to clients. The meeting invitations that somehow never reached my inbox until decisions were already made. The committee room falls silent. Not political theater silence, but the genuine hush of recognition. 3 representatives have military children. 2 others have minority staffers nodding imperceptibly as Marcus speaks. But the smoking gun, Marcus continues, was the data. With a nod from the committee chair, the massive screen behind him illuminates with statistical analysis so precise it could guide missile systems. First Meridian had a 78% lower promotion rate for minorities with identical qualifications. 83% higher termination rates for veterans with disabilities. 94% of positions requiring client interaction went to non-minority candidates. Each statistic lands like artillery fire, precise and devastating. This wasn't just feeling unwelcome. This was mathematical proof of systematic exclusion. Representative John Miller, notorious defense industry ally, attempts to minimize the damage. While these numbers are certainly concerning, couldn't they simply reflect different qualifications or performance metrics rather than deliberate discrimination? Marcus doesn't bristle. He smiles. It's the calm smile of someone who anticipated this exact question and prepared accordingly. An excellent point, Representative Miller. Which is why we conducted controlled tests. The screen behind him shifts to side-by-side resumes. Identical qualifications, identical experience, identical achievements. Only the names changed. Michael Williams, 47% chance of receiving an interview. Deshaun Williams, 12% chance. Jennifer Rodriguez, 38% chance of promotion. Maria Rodriguez, 9% chance. The mathematical precision is damning beyond argument. When we controlled for every variable except demographic markers, the pattern wasn't just clear, it was prosecutable. The room temperature seems to drop 10 degrees. 7 defense contractor executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. Their companies, names haven't been mentioned yet, but the statistical methodology being displayed could just as easily expose their own discriminatory patterns. But the most compelling evidence came from First Meridian's own records. Marcus continues, methodically dismantling every potential defense. Internal communications revealing explicit directives to maintain brand consistency in client-facing positions. HR guidance on identifying candidates with cultural alignment. Executive bonuses tied to maintaining specific company image metrics. The screen displays redacted but still damning corporate communications. No explicit racial slurs. No smoking gun email declaring "don't hire minorities." Just the careful corporate language of systematic exclusion. The sanitized vocabulary of institutional racism. They created perfect plausible deniability, Marcus explains. Every individual decision could be justified with non-discriminatory reasoning. It was only when viewed as a pattern that the systematic nature became undeniable. Representative Santos leans forward. And what happened when you confronted this pattern directly? Marcus's face displays the first hint of genuine emotion. Not anger, not bitterness. Something closer to disappointment in humanity's capacity for self-deception. They responded with what I call procedural racism. Technically correct policies applied selectively to achieve discriminatory outcomes. Performance reviews that emphasize subjective metrics for certain employees but objective metrics for others. Cultural fit. Evaluations that somehow always found minorities lacking. Security protocols that required additional verification from specific demographic groups. The veterans behind Marcus nod in silent recognition. They've all experienced the phenomenon he's describing. Discrimination camouflaged as procedure, prejudice hidden behind policy. When I finally confronted management directly, they didn't use racial slurs, they didn't make explicitly discriminatory statements. They simply explained that I wasn't a cultural fit for leadership, despite 8 years of exemplary service and a network of military connections that generated billions in contracts. Representative Miller attempts one final defense of industry practices. Major Johnson, wouldn't you agree that companies have legitimate interests in maintaining consistent corporate culture and selecting leaders who align with their strategic vision? The question is a carefully laid trap. Agree, and he undermines his own case. Disagree, and he appears unreasonable. Marcus doesn't take the bait. Representative Miller, I commanded a forward operating base in Kandahar with personnel from 7 different countries, 4 military branches, and dozens of cultural backgrounds. We maintained perfect operational cohesion without requiring everyone to look alike or come from identical backgrounds. In fact, our diversity of perspective saved lives by identifying threats from multiple viewpoints. He leans forward, voice carrying the undeniable authority of combat experience. So yes, I believe in cohesive culture. I just define it by shared values rather than shared demographics. Excellence, integrity, and innovation know no color barrier. The room erupts in spontaneous applause, something almost unheard of in congressional hearings. 3 military veterans in the audience stand at attention, an unprecedented display of solidarity. Representative Santos brings the proceedings back to order, then asks the question that will define defense industry practices for generations. Major Johnson, based on your experience, what specific reforms would you recommend to address these systematic discrimination patterns? Marcus doesn't hesitate. He's been preparing for this moment for 3 years. First, mandatory statistical analysis of hiring, promotion, and termination patterns, with federal contracting contingent on demonstrating non-discriminatory outcomes, not just good intentions. Measurable results. The defense contractors exchange nervous glances. They can lobby against subjective standards. Mathematical accountability is much harder to circumvent. Second, financial liability for discrimination that extends to board members and executives personally, not just corporate entities. When prejudice affects personal bank accounts, it becomes much less acceptable. Several board members from major contractors blanch visibly. Corporate fines they can manage. Personal accountability changes the calculus entirely. Third, restructuring defense procurement to value diversity of perspective as a national security asset. Teams with homogeneous viewpoints miss threats that diverse teams identify. This isn't just about fairness, it's about combat effectiveness. The military officers in attendance nod emphatically. They've seen firsthand how diverse units outperform homogeneous ones in complex combat environments. Fourth, establishing confidential reporting channels directly to Pentagon compliance officers, bypassing corporate HR departments that often serve to protect the company rather than address discrimination. HR directors from 7 major contractors shift uncomfortably. Their entire professional purpose has just been identified as part of the problem. And finally, creating tangible economic incentives for companies that demonstrate inclusive excellence. Preferential contract consideration, accelerated payment schedules, priority vendor status. Marcus pauses, allowing the comprehensive strategy to sink in. Because ultimately, this isn't about punishment. It's about creating environments where talent flourishes regardless of demographic. The goal isn't to tear down companies. It's to make them more innovative, more competitive, and more effective by tapping the full spectrum of American excellence. The room falls silent again, but this time it's the silence of recognition. Not just of a problem, but of a viable pathway forward. Representative Santa studies Marcus for a long moment, then asks the question everyone has been wondering. Major Johnson, after your experience at First Meridian, why didn't you pursue legal damages personally? You could have won millions in a discrimination lawsuit. Marcus looks around the committee room, making eye contact with each veteran seated behind him before answering. Because this was never about me, it was about creating systematic change that benefits everyone who follows. Individual lawsuits might compensate specific victims, but they rarely address the underlying patterns. He gestures to the transformed statistics displayed on the massive screen. Since First Meridian's restructuring, minority executive hiring has increased 380% across the defense sector. Veteran employment in leadership positions has risen 340%. Contract awards to diverse teams have generated $3 billion in innovations that homogeneous groups missed entirely. His voice takes on the calm authority of someone stating irrefutable facts. The most powerful weapon against discrimination isn't a lawsuit. It's proof that inclusion outperforms exclusion by every measurable metric. When diversity becomes a competitive advantage rather than a compliance requirement, systematic change follows naturally. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, seated in the front row, nods emphatically. He's seen the performance data. He knows Marcus is right. Representative Miller makes one final attempt to minimize the scope of necessary reform. While First Meridian's case is certainly compelling, isn't it possible this was an isolated incident rather than an industry-wide pattern requiring sweeping regulatory changes? Marcus doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he turns to the veterans seated behind him. I'd like to call forward Lieutenant Commander Grace Chen, U.S. Navy. A woman in uniform rises with military precision and approaches the microphone. Her bearing is flawless. Her credentials impeccable. 3 combat tours, top security clearance, multiple commendations. Lieutenant Commander Chen, could you share your experience with the committee? Chen doesn't refer to notes. She doesn't need to. She's lived this reality. After developing cryptographic systems that saved an estimated 347 American lives in classified operations, I applied for 7 leadership positions at defense contractors. Despite having qualifications that exceeded the stated requirements, I received 0 offers. When I changed my application to use my middle name Elizabeth instead of Grace and removed the military photo that showed my ethnicity, I received 4 interview requests from the same companies that previously rejected me. Her testimony is delivered with military precision, factual, unemotional, devastatingly effective. Technical Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, U.S. Air Force, a Hispanic man with combat decorations visible on his uniform approaches. After leading drone operations that identified 23 high-value targets, I applied for a position at Northrop Grumman that perfectly matched my qualifications. I was told I wasn't a cultural fit for client interaction roles. 2 weeks later, a white colleague with lower performance metrics and less experience was hired for the same position. Marcus continues this devastating procession: 7 veterans, 7 branches of service, 7 nearly identical stories of qualification meeting rejection based on factors unrelated to merit. The cumulative impact silences even Representative Miller. This isn't anecdotal evidence anymore. It's a pattern so consistent it constitutes mathematical proof. When the last veteran returns to their seat, Marcus delivers his closing argument. Representative Miller, you asked if First Meridian was an isolated incident. The data suggests otherwise. We've documented similar patterns across 42 major defense contractors, 27 military technology firms, and 18 cybersecurity providers. The screen behind him displays a statistical matrix so comprehensive it resembles battle planning software. This isn't about individual bigotry. Most of these companies have diversity statements, inclusion initiatives, and non-discrimination policies. The problem is systematic, disparate outcomes that persist despite stated intentions. He gestures to the veterans seated behind him. Every person here represents talent our national defense cannot afford to waste. Every innovation rejected, every perspective excluded, every qualified candidate overlooked, represents a strategic vulnerability. The room falls completely silent. Even the committee members who came prepared to defend industry practices recognize the national security implications. The most common objection I hear is that addressing these patterns would impose burdensome compliance costs on defense contractors. Marcus continues, systematically dismantling the final line of resistance. But what's the cost of missing the next breakthrough technology because it came from someone who didn't fit a predetermined demographic profile? What's the expense of losing battlefield advantages because homogeneous teams missed threats that diverse perspectives would have identified? He stands straighter, his prosthetic hand catching the light. I lost this hand clearing an IED that homogeneous intelligence failed to identify. A Taliban bomb maker changed his methodology in a way that matched patterns common in his cultural background but unfamiliar to Western analysts. An Afghan-American specialist identified the pattern 2 weeks later, but not before 3 Americans lost limbs and 2 lost their lives. The human cost of homogeneous thinking hangs in the air like artillery smoke. So when we talk about the burden of inclusion, I invite you to calculate the burden of its absence. Measure it in missed innovations, overlooked threats, and blood spilled because we valued demographic comfort over tactical effectiveness. The committee chair recognizes this is the moment to conclude testimony. Some truths are so self-evident that further discussion diminishes their impact. Thank you, Major Johnson. Your testimony will be entered into the permanent record. But before Marcus can return to his seat, Representative Santos asks one final question. Major Johnson, if you could speak directly to defense industry executives watching this hearing, what would you tell them? Marcus considers for a moment, then delivers the message that will be quoted in corporate boardrooms for decades. I would tell them that diversity isn't a compliance requirement to be managed, it's a tactical advantage to be leveraged. In battlefield conditions, homogeneous thinking creates predictable vulnerabilities. Diverse perspectives identify threats and opportunities that uniform viewpoints miss consistently. He gestures to his prosthetic hand. I paid the price for homogeneous analysis with flesh and bone. Our nation pays for it with lost innovations, missed intelligence, and diminished combat effectiveness. His voice takes on the quiet authority of absolute conviction. So I wouldn't ask them to change because it's morally right, though it is. I wouldn't ask them to change because it's legally required, though it's becoming so. I would ask them to change because diversity of perspective represents the greatest untapped strategic resource in national defense. He surveys the committee with the steady gaze of someone who has faced both battlefield and boardroom opposition without flinching. The countries and companies that recognize this first will define the future of warfare. The question isn't whether you can afford to change. It's whether you can afford not to. As Marcus returns to his seat, 7 defense contractors reach for their phones simultaneously, not to call their lawyers or PR teams, but to contact their strategic planning departments. Because the most powerful argument for inclusion isn't moral or legal, it's mathematical. When diversity becomes a competitive advantage rather than a compliance requirement, systematic change follows with the inevitability of battlefield physics. 3 months later, the Defense Contractor Accountability Act passes with unprecedented bipartisan support. Not because Congress suddenly discovered moral courage, but because Pentagon analysis confirmed what Marcus had demonstrated. Diverse teams consistently outperform homogeneous ones in complex defense environments. The legislation doesn't mandate hiring quotas or diversity statements. It simply requires statistical transparency and ties contract eligibility to demonstrated non-discriminatory outcomes. When excellence becomes the only viable standard, discrimination becomes too expensive to maintain. As Marcus watches the president sign the bill into law, surrounded by the veterans whose testimony helped secure its passage, he receives a text message from an unknown number. "You were right. Inclusion outperforms exclusion. We're implementing your recommendations company-wide. Richard Whitman." The message comes from federal prison, where Whitman is serving time for contract fraud. Even the architects of discrimination have recognized its strategic disadvantage. Marcus doesn't respond. Some lessons must be learned through consequence rather than conversation. Instead, he turns to Lieutenant Commander Chen, who now leads quantum cryptography research at a reformed First Meridian. "You know what the real victory is?" he asks quietly. "It's not the legislation, or the contracts, or even the accountability." He gestures to a young black lieutenant being interviewed about innovative drone countermeasures she developed after 3 defense contractors rejected her applications. "It's that the next generation won't have to fight the battles we fought. They'll be too busy creating innovations that our limited perspective couldn't even imagine." Chen nods, her own path from rejection to recognition still fresh in memory. "The most powerful weapon against discrimination was never outrage," Marcus continues. "It was proving mathematically that prejudice creates strategic vulnerabilities that no defense contractor can afford." When the ceremony concludes, Marcus doesn't join the political celebration. Instead, he heads to the Pentagon, where a new generation of veterans awaits his mentorship. Because the true measure of victory isn't legislation signed or contracts awarded. It's creating pathways for excellence that future generations won't have to fight to access. As he passes through security, the young officer checking credentials recognizes him immediately. "Major Johnson, your congressional testimony changed my entire career trajectory. 3 companies that rejected me last year just called with executive offers." Marcus smiles, the weight of his long battle finally lifting. "That's how you know we're winning. Not when discrimination becomes illegal, but when it becomes unprofitable. The future of defense isn't defined by demographics, but by demonstrations of excellence." The companies that recognize this truth first are already reaping strategic advantages that their competitors cannot match. And it all began because one man refused to accept unacceptable treatment, transforming personal humiliation into institutional revolution. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't litigation or legislation. It's proving mathematically that excellence knows no demographic boundaries. And in matters of national defense, excellence is the only standard that truly matters. 5 years after testifying before Congress, Marcus Johnson stands at the podium of the Pentagon's Grand Auditorium. Behind him hangs the newly unveiled Excellence Without Exception Initiative logo, a shield emblazoned with stars representing every branch of military service, surrounded by hands of different colors working together. The symbolism isn't subtle, but then again, military culture has never prized subtlety over clarity. Before him sit 200 defense industry executives, military procurement officers, and government officials. Not an empty seat in the House. When the Pentagon makes attendance, quote, "strongly encouraged," people find a way to be present. 10 years ago, Marcus begins, his voice carrying the measured authority that transformed an industry. "I was escorted from First Meridian Defense Headquarters after being told I wasn't a cultural fit for leadership. He lets the statement hang in the air for 3 seconds, the perfect military pause for emphasis. Today, I'm pleased to announce that the Department of Defense has awarded the $4.2 billion Integrated Defense Network contract to First Meridian's restructured organization, now led by CEO Dr. Grace Chen. The auditorium erupts in applause as Chen, the former Navy lieutenant commander who testified alongside Marcus, rises from her front row seat to acknowledge the announcement. Her journey from rejected applicant to industry-leading CEO represents everything the initiative stands for. This contract wasn't awarded because of diversity targets or demographic quotas. Marcus continues once the applause subsides. It was awarded because First Meridian's integrated team developed superior technology that outperformed every competitor in blind testing scenarios. He gestures to the massive screen behind him, where performance metrics display the unambiguous results. First Meridian's system detected 97% of simulated threats compared to the industry average of 68%. Their countermeasures neutralized 94% of attacks versus the standard 71%. The numbers don't lie, Marcus says, his prosthetic hand gesturing toward the incontrovertible data. And the story they tell isn't about social justice or moral obligation. It's about tactical advantage derived from cognitive diversity. The executives shift in their seats. This isn't the standard DEI presentation they've been conditioned to tune out. This is hard data linking diversity to combat effectiveness, the one metric no defense contractor can afford to ignore. 5 years ago, many in this room questioned whether addressing discrimination patterns would compromise defense capabilities. Marcus acknowledges, making eye contact with several executives who had publicly opposed the reforms. Today I'm sharing the results of the most comprehensive performance analysis ever conducted in the defense sector. The screen transitions to show side-by-side comparisons of homogeneous versus diverse teams across 327 critical defense functions. The pattern is unmistakable. Diverse teams outperformed homogeneous ones in 89% of complex problem-solving scenarios, 92% of threat identification exercises, and 94% of innovation challenges. This isn't theory anymore, Marcus states flatly. It's battlefield math. The Pentagon's Chief of Strategic Operations nods emphatically from the front row. She's seen the classified portions of this data, the real-world combat operations, where diverse analysis teams identified threats that homogeneous groups missed consistently. But the most compelling evidence comes from the market itself. Marcus continues, shifting to the financial impact that holds executives' complete attention. The screen displays the performance of defense contractors before and after implementing the excellence without exception standards. Companies that embraced the reforms early show an average 38% increase in contract awards. Those that resisted show a 42% decline. The free market has rendered its verdict, Marcus observes. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong and legally prohibited. It's become financially unsustainable. Several CEOs nod reluctantly. They may not have embraced inclusion out of moral conviction, but they've certainly recognized its impact on their bottom line. Nothing transforms corporate culture faster than watching competitors secure contracts you once considered guaranteed. Which brings us to today's announcement, quote, Marcus says, his voice taking on the tone of someone about to reshape an industry yet again. The screen behind him shifts to display the new Pentagon procurement guidelines that will define defense contracting for the next decade. Effective immediately, all defense contracts exceeding $50 million will require bidders to submit anonymized performance metrics demonstrating excellence without demographic exception. The auditorium falls silent as executives process the implications. This isn't about diversity statements or inclusion pledges. It's about measurable performance across demographic categories. Companies don't need to prove they hire specific percentages of any demographic group, Marcus clarifies. They simply need to demonstrate that qualified candidates achieve similar outcomes regardless of background. Excellence without artificial limitation. The brilliance of the approach silences even the staunchest critics. This isn't social engineering. It's simply removing obstacles to excellence, a concept no defense contractor can publicly oppose without admitting to supporting mediocrity. To illustrate what this means in practice, Marcus continues, I'd like to share a case study that changed my understanding of why this matters beyond statistics. The screen displays a classified operation codename that causes several military officers to sit straighter in their seats. They recognize the significance instantly. Operation Rapid Response involved neutralizing a previously undetected threat to critical infrastructure. The detection came from an analyst who had been rejected by 3 major contractors before finding placement through our reformed hiring practices. The image shifts to show specialist Aisha Jackson, a young black woman whose algorithm identified vulnerability patterns that conventional analysis missed entirely. Jackson's approach drew from mathematical principles she learned in her grandmother's quilting patterns, a perspective entirely absent from traditional defense thinking. Her unconventional methodology identified 17 critical vulnerabilities that conventional analysis missed completely. Marcus pauses, allowing the implications to sink in. Those vulnerabilities have now been patched, preventing what 3 separate simulations confirmed would have been a catastrophic infrastructure collapse affecting 38 states. The room falls completely silent. This isn't about feeling good about inclusion, this is about national security at its most fundamental level. I often hear executives ask about the cost of implementing these reforms. Marcus acknowledges, addressing the financial concern that remains the final line of resistance. So let me be absolutely clear. What would have been the cost of missing the threat specialist Jackson identified? How many billions in infrastructure damage? How many American lives potentially lost? What price tag would you assign to that failure? The question hangs unanswered because everyone in the room knows the truth. Some costs are too catastrophic to calculate. But since we're discussing finances, Marcus continues, shifting to the language executives understand best, let's examine the return on investment for companies that implemented these standards early. The screen displays a financial analysis that causes several CEOs to lean forward with intense interest. Companies that embraced the excellence without exception standards showed a 47% increase in successful contract bids, 32% improvement in innovation metrics, and 28% reduction in costly project failures. The data is unambiguous, Marcus states. Removing artificial barriers to talent doesn't just feel good, it pays dividends. He gestures to Dr. Chen in the front row. First Meridian was once the poster child for institutional discrimination. Today it's the industry leader in defense innovation, precisely because it taps talent that its competitors once overlooked. Chen nods in acknowledgement, her journey from rejected applicant to transformative CEO embodying everything the initiative represents. But the most powerful evidence isn't found in statistics. Marcus continues, his voice softening slightly. It's found in the innovations that homogeneous thinking simply couldn't produce. The screen displays a montage of breakthrough defense technologies developed by teams that would never have formed under previous hiring practices. A drone guidance system designed by a team including 2 veterans with PTSD who approached threat identification from unique perspectives. A cybersecurity protocol developed by neurodivergent specialists whose pattern recognition abilities outperformed conventional approaches by 340%. A battlefield medical technology created by an amputee veteran who understood firsthand what wounded soldiers truly needed. These innovations didn't emerge from diversity initiatives, Marcus emphasizes. They emerged from removing artificial barriers to excellence. When merit becomes the only standard that matters, unprecedented capabilities follow naturally. The Pentagon's procurement director nods emphatically. She's seen the classified performance metrics. She knows Marcus isn't exaggerating. Which brings me to the next phase of our transformation, Marcus says, his voice taking on the tone that executives have learned signals industry-changing announcements. The screen shifts to display the new Defense Innovation Partnership requirements that will reshape contracting relationships for the next generation. Beginning next fiscal year, the Department of Defense will implement blind capability testing for all major procurement decisions. No company names, no executive relationships, no historical preferences, just pure performance evaluation. Several executives who built careers on Pentagon relationships shift uncomfortably. Merit-based evaluation threatens the old boy networks that once determined contract awards. Some will call this radical, Marcus acknowledges. I call it returning to the fundamental military principle that's kept America safe for generations. The best person for the mission, regardless of any factor except capability. He pauses, allowing the statement to resonate with the military officers present. No combat commander would choose a less qualified soldier based on demographic preference. Why would defense procurement operate differently? To demonstrate our commitment to this principle, Marcus continues, I'm announcing a $5 billion innovation challenge open to any qualified team regardless of corporate affiliation. The evaluation will be conducted through blind testing, with all identifying information removed. The sum causes audible murmurs throughout the auditorium. $5 billion awarded solely on demonstrated capability would reshape the industry overnight. Some will undoubtedly resist these changes, Marcus acknowledges, addressing the unspoken opposition directly. They'll claim we're sacrificing tradition for social engineering. They'll argue that relationship-based contracting provided stability. Quote, his voice takes on an edge of quiet determination. To them I say this: America's adversaries don't care about our traditions or relationships. They care only about exploiting our vulnerabilities. And the greatest vulnerability in any defense system is complacency. The belief that the way we've always done things is the way they should always be done. The statement silences even the most traditional officers present. No military leader can argue against combating complacency. 5 years ago, I stood before Congress as someone who had been dismissed because I didn't fit a predetermined leadership image. Marcus recalls, bringing his presentation full circle. Today, I stand before you as living proof that excellence knows no demographic boundaries. My prosthetic hand didn't diminish my capability. It enhanced my perspective on vulnerability. My combat experience didn't make me unsuitable for corporate leadership. It gave me insights no business school could provide. He gestures to Dr. Chen and the transformed First Meridian leadership team seated in the front row. And the company that once rejected qualified candidates based on cultural fit now leads the industry precisely because it embraced talent that its competitors overlooked. The auditorium falls silent as Marcus delivers his closing statement, the words that will be quoted in corporate boardrooms and military briefings for generations. The principle is simple: excellence without exception. Not as a moral imperative, though it is that. Not as a legal requirement, though it has become that. But as a strategic necessity in a world where the highest stakes competitions are won by those who harness every available talent without artificial limitation. He surveys the assembled executives with the steady gaze of someone who has transformed an industry through sheer force of demonstrated truth. The future of American defense doesn't belong to companies with the best connections or the most traditional approaches. It belongs to those who recognize that excellence is the only standard that truly matters. And excellence knows no demographic boundaries. As Marcus concludes his presentation, the Pentagon's acquisition chief rises to announce the first round of contracts awarded under the new Blind Capability Testing Protocol. 3 of the 5 major awards go to companies previously considered industry outsiders. 2 go to veteran-led startups that wouldn't have survived the relationship-based contracting of the previous era. The message is unmistakable. Merit has become the only currency that matters. In the aftermath, Marcus finds himself approached by Richard Whitman, the former CEO whose discrimination launched this entire transformation. Released from prison after serving his sentence, Whitman now consults with companies implementing the excellence without exception standards. You were right, Whitman acknowledges, the humility of someone who learned his lesson the hard way. Discrimination wasn't just wrong. It was strategically stupid. Marcus studies the man who once dismissed him, seeing not an enemy, but a messenger for the transformative power of accountability. The goal was never punishment, Marcus responds. It was evolution. Companies either adapt to excellence-based standards or they become irrelevant. Whitman nods, his hard-earned wisdom evident in his expression. The irony is that I thought I was protecting our competitive advantage by maintaining demographic homogeneity. I couldn't see that I was actually creating our greatest vulnerability. That's the thing about blind spots, Marcus observes. By definition, you can't see them until something forces you to look from a different perspective. As they part ways, Marcus is approached by a young black lieutenant who displays the distinctive prosthetic technology developed by First Meridian's integrated team. Technology specifically designed by amputee veterans who understood the battlefield requirements firsthand. Major Johnson, the lieutenant says, her voice carrying unmistakable emotion, your work made this possible. Not just the technology, but the opportunity. 10 years ago, someone like me wouldn't have had a path to leadership. Marcus studies the young officer, seeing in her the future he fought to create. a future where talent transcends demographic limitations. The most powerful weapon against discrimination was never outrage or litigation, he tells her quietly. It was proving mathematically that excellence knows no boundaries. When prejudice becomes a competitive disadvantage, systems change themselves. The lieutenant nods, understanding the profound truth in his words. So what's next? She asks. Where does the transformation go from here? Marcus smiles, recognizing the question he once asked his own mentors. The next frontier isn't just removing barriers, he explains. It's actively seeking cognitive diversity as a strategic advantage. Not just tolerating different perspectives, but deliberately cultivating them because they identify threats and opportunities that homogeneous thinking misses consistently. He gestures to the defense industry leaders now gathered around Dr. Chen, eagerly seeking insights from the CEO they would have overlooked a decade ago. The companies that understand this first will define the future of national security. The ones that don't will become case studies in strategic obsolescence. As the event concludes, Marcus doesn't join the VIP reception. Instead, he heads to Walter Reed Medical Center, where a new generation of wounded veterans awaits mentorship through the transition program he established. Because the true measure of transformation isn't policies implemented or contracts awarded. It's creating pathways that future generations can walk without fighting the battles he once fought. As he enters the rehabilitation center, a young Marine with fresh prosthetics recognizes him immediately. Major Johnson, your Pentagon initiative changed everything for us. 3 defense contractors just visited recruiting specifically for wounded veterans. They're looking for our perspective, not despite our injuries, but because of the unique insights they provide. Marcus smiles, the weight of his long struggle finally lifting completely. That's how you know the transformation is real, he tells the young Marine. Not when inclusion becomes required, but when exclusion becomes recognized as a competitive disadvantage. The future of defense isn't defined by demographics, but by the deliberate cultivation of diverse perspectives that identify threats homogeneous thinking consistently misses. The companies and commanders who recognize this truth first are already deploying capabilities their competitors cannot match. And it all began because one man refused to accept rejection based on factors unrelated to capability, transforming personal humiliation into institutional revolution that made America safer by tapping its full spectrum of excellence. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't fighting the system. It's proving mathematically that the system weakens itself by imposing artificial limitations on talent. Because in matters of national security, the only standard that truly matters is excellence. And excellence, when permitted to flourish without exception, knows no demographic boundaries. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.